So, Silent Hill PT. For those who don't know, Silent Hill PT stands for Playable Teaser or Playable Trailer. It was a sort of demo teaser for the new Silent Hill game, which involved everyone's favorite Hideo Kojima, and also had Guillermo del Toro and Norman Reedus. But Silent Hill PT never happened. Why not? Well, that still remains to be seen. The story as we know it is that Kojima and Konami had a bit of a falling out and the project got scrapped shortly after the ending of Metal Gear 5, Phantom Pain. Though PT's project may be dead, that's not to say there's nothing we can learn from it. For those of you who don't know, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to game design, especially involving horror games. And PT was a treat for me. I've watched a few different playthroughs on it, and I even got a chance to play it a little bit myself. Unfortunately, I don't have any footage for you, not now, because I didn't get the chance to record it when I played it, but I did get to experience this game firsthand, and it was terrifying. But why? Why was this game so scary? Well, there's a very good video on that, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. The guys over at Arcadea do an excellent job of explaining the hallway, the nightmare fuel that is Silent Hill PT. At least concerning the uncanny. But there's more to it than that. The game, despite just being unsettling, also told you a story, even though it was maybe 40 minutes at the most, unless you didn't know what you were doing. And that story is a lot more sinister than we give it credit for. Granted, it's not especially original, and it's sort of generic and short, but it's still a little bit eerie. If you're not acquainted, here's the basic rundown. A man living with his family shot his wife and his son in their kitchen with a rifle he purchased days earlier. The daughter, for fear of her life, hid in the bathroom. The father weaseled her out by convincing her it was just a game. He then shot her in the chest at point-blank range. And the wife was pregnant at the time of the murder. That explains our little Eraserhead baby. But there's a few other interesting incidents. After the murder, the father hung himself with a garden hose they had in the garage. But after a few rounds in the game, the radio gets a bit distorted, and you can hear an alternate version under what the newscaster is saying. The alternate version claims instead of a garden hose, it was an umbilical cord. Neighbors called 911, as stated by the newscaster, and police on scene found the father in the car, listening to the radio. Neighbors claimed that days before, the man was loudly repeating numbers, like some strange chant. As we find out later, the numbers he was most likely chanting were 204863, a number that comes up several times in the news report on the radio. Something else worth noting, Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, another game Kojima worked on, as I mentioned before, has an Easter egg in it pertaining to Silent Hill PT. There's a radio in one sector of the game, and that radio plays this news broadcast. There's a radio in one sector of the game, and that radio plays this news broadcast. A bit eerie. The game also correlates this to a couple of other murders. Another family was shot to death in the same state last month. And a year earlier in December, a man used a rifle and a meat cleaver to murder his entire family. An interesting connection here is that all of the killers involved were fathers. Now the game has quite a few other small sequences here and there. For example, the radio says, "You can't trust the tap water." There's also the famous "look behind you" sequence that everyone knows quite well, and "don't touch that dial now," which is also rather infamous. On top of that, At one point, the radio transmission mutates, and it starts speaking in some sort of demonic voice in an alternate language. All of these build up to give a eerie sense of something more in the game. Something else worth note is that a few times around, you see an icebox, a freezer, swinging from the ceiling. And there's something dripping from it. It seems very suspicious at first. Just a freezer full of blood. Why is that there? So strange. Your next loop around, that freezer is swaying much more violently than before. And there's a sound coming from it. It's muffled, but it's distinct. The screaming of a child. There's a few other things like the icebox throughout the game, like the fact that when you peer into the bathroom door, Lisa pops up and shuts it. There's no warning bells, just she pops up and shuts the door, but it's still startling. During their video, the Arcadea guys mention that there's this element to PT of it's mostly you scaring yourself, and it's entirely right. It's a large element of psychological horror. One thing that amazes me is that people forget when making horror games that the best tactic for scaring someone is just giving them the tools to scare the bejesus out of themselves. And it's very simple. In fact, it's almost the better way to do horror. It requires less effort. You don't have to go through the time of making a horrifying, mutilated monster. Just make the scenario that a monster would be in, and people will find the scares themselves. You just have to be certain that you don't make it obvious that there's no monster to be found. That's another element of brilliance in PT. Ultimately, there's no real threat. I mean, if Lisa catches you, it just moves you on. It doesn't actually make you start the game over, though you may think so at first. So there's no imminent danger. There's no threat. There's no pyramid head chasing you around. There's no grunt trying to kill you. No one trying to stuff your head into a animatronic suit. No. It's just an unsettling hallway. That's the entire game. It's not a sprawling, nightmarish cavern. Some endless stairwell down. Just the same hallway, a little bit different every time. There are some nightmarish elements here and there, like the bloody freezer or the broken window, or Lisa standing in the light, but not much else. Like I mentioned, it's mostly the players scaring themselves. Be it the cockroaches, the darkness, the weird figure at the end of the hallway that just sort of disappears. It's a very well-crafted game. It's very unsettling. And that's what this game specializes in. It's part of the reason I'm so disappointed that PT never came to be. There's an unsettling brilliance to this game that when it comes to horror, there's not much else that can top it. As the fellows at Arcadea mentioned in their video, the game does a very good job at the uncanny. Just little bits that seem off. The lighting, the photorealism of the hallway, even minor things like the M&Ms. The game may be short, and there's not a whole lot of text outside of subtitles. In fact, there's almost none at all. But the game tells this disturbing story. Something almost straight out of a horror novel. With no words at all. Just a radio transmission and the occasional blurb from a weird talking bag, or everyone's favorite Eraserhead baby, and just atmosphere. It's very eerie. Very scary. And it's excellent. There's not many games I've encountered that do what PT did quite as well. It's brilliant. And there's so many small details to this game. For example, there's one that a lot of people don't even know about. On one of your loops around the house, and most people notice this right away, there's a second floor. In fact, there's a second floor the whole time. But on one of the loops, there's someone up there. Lisa, the ghost woman everyone knows so well, the one who jump scares you and freaks the shit out of you for most of the game, is actually up there. There's no jump scare. There's no threatening, menacing move. She's just there, watching you. She backs away slowly, back into the darkness. Most people don't even see it because it's hardly noticeable. It's not apparent. She's not hanging halfway over the banister. She's just there in the darkness, watching, waiting. There's a brilliance in PT when it comes to horror. This amazing, almost jack-of-all-trades horror. It's got a little bit of everything. Psychological horror, background jump scares, and everyone's favorite, the straightforward jump scares. And it's brilliant. There's little bits of it represented in all kinds of other things. I already mentioned the bit with Lisa on the banister. It's very akin to The Strangers. If you've never seen the movie, there's more than a few scenes where the antagonists, the strangers, various people in masks, and I believe one just has a bag over his head. There's various scenes where they're just there. Not actually doing anything, not approaching the protagonist, just watching in the background. No knife, no gun. They're not preparing to kill anyone, just standing there, silently. The most famous scene is one where the protagonist goes to get a drink of water, and if you pay close attention, on the left side of the screen, there's a doorway. Now, for most of the scene, there's nothing there. But at one point, one of the strangers walks into the doorway. It's very dark. He's not especially easy to see, and he doesn't make himself apparent. He's just there. And then he leaves. No announcement. No shock stinger sound effect. He's just gone. And the protagonist doesn't even notice. It's purely a scare to disturb the audience. And it's brilliant. PT does a few of the same. There is a bit of storytelling to the game, but not much. At the very end of the demo, the child, whoever it is, starts talking to the player, referencing his father. Future me, if you would ever so kindly, go ahead and cut in that sequence.
Dad was such a drag. Every day he'd eat the same kind of food, dress the same, sit in front of the same kind of games. Yeah, he was just that kind of guy. But then one day he goes and kills us all. He couldn't even be original about the way he did it. I'm not complaining. I was dying of boredom anyway. But guess what? I will be coming back, and I'm bringing my new toys with me.
Pretty creepy, right? But it's interesting what's referenced here. Dad was such a drag. Every day he'd eat the same kind of food, dress the same, sit in front of the same kind of games. Yeah, he was just that kind of guy. But then one day he goes and kills us all. He couldn't even be original about the way he did it. I'm not complaining, I was dying of boredom anyway. What is this in reference to? There's a few things potential here, but the most likely is the first murder referenced near the beginning of the game, the father who shoots his wife and son in the kitchen. It's very akin to the other two murders, which would explain the comment about the originality, and he did kill everyone involved. But then here's the question. Why is the child talking about this? Which kid is referencing it? Are we talking about the son, who was shot with the mother, or are we talking about the baby? The voice in question is the same as the child in the sink, but that's presumed to be the unborn child. So, why would he know about all of this? What's going on here? And that's kind of the question in PT. It feels like a setup for something more. There's a theory rolling around that maybe PT's not actually dead. Hideo Kojima's always been a fan of hiding secrets and making those secrets very, very cryptic, pulling pranks on his players. That's been a thing all throughout the Metal Gear Solid games. There's the famous fake crash. There's also the sequence where Psycho Mantis takes away your control and things to that effect. So, there's a question to be asked here. Is that really the case? Could it be that Hideo Kojima is just pranking everyone? That this game is actually going to take place, and it's not done yet, and he's intentionally hiding everything? Maybe. No, I'm not saying that's the case. More than anything, that's just wishful thinking. But how brilliant would that be? How brilliant would it be that all of this time, Konami and Kojima have been working together? All of this time, it's been just a ruse. Nothing more. They've been deceiving us to prevent the hype, to prevent the game being not as good as people hoped. And instead it just comes out of the blue, almost like Scott Cawthon's Five Nights at Freddy's games. It's an interesting approach, and definitely would be something to be talked about. But I'll leave that for you guys to decide. I'll leave a link to Arcadea's video on PT, and feel free to talk a bit about this in the description. I'd like to hear what you guys think of the whole thing. Personally, I'd love to see PT come back. I think it was a fantastic project. I didn't get to play a ton of it, and we didn't actually beat the game when I played it, but it was definitely unsettling, that's for sure. But for now, that's going to be the end. I'll see you guys next time.